Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah? All right, cool. Well, welcome to me and to you. I'm going to be talking about Omeka today. I'm going to be here for 3 sessions total, so I just wanted to give you all kind of an overview of what I'm thinking we'll do. Early part, first session, we'll kind of talk about where I'm coming from, because Omeka's got a lot of different ways you can take it, so I feel like it's only fair to talk about what my perspective on this is going to be. And try to get a sense from y'all as to who's used it, what you're looking for, and then how Omeka thinks of itself as well. And then we'll talk about Omeka.net versus the locally hosted one, and then we'll look around Omeka. Later this afternoon, and this will be the fun bit, so you should come back, we're actually going to set up accounts and play with them. Set up digital, you can pull them off the internet if you didn't bring them with you, digital files, put them together in collections, build exhibits from them. The whole thing's free. You just need to give them an email address. They don't even send you spam. It's really cool. And then we'll see how you feel about it. And we talk about what you liked, what you didn't like, what you wanted to do that you couldn't do. And that'll be later in the afternoon. And then we can kind of talk about the online Omeka versus the installation of Omeka, because the installation, as you'll see, gives you a lot more flexibility. And then we'll actually look at some examples of these other Omeka installations where you get a lot more control and some of the cool stuff people have done with them. Me. I'm originally from New England. I'm not a Texan. I'm from Connecticut, actually. I have an undergraduate degree from Oberlin College in Northern Ohio, where it snows a lot. It's a photo. Oberlin, which was founded by women who looked like this. And this picture's in here mostly because I think it's hilarious. I did a lot of British history and literature. I have a particular fondness for the Victorians. But by the end, I was doing a lot of post-colonial stuff, which is, I found this on somebody's blog. It's a really good kind of summation of what this means. After that, I moved to Boston with my newly minted degree in post-colonial theory and ended up driving a tourist trolley around town, which was public history by fire. If anybody's ever been on one of these, you're essentially a bus driver talking about things like Paul Revere's house, which is the oldest wooden building still standing in America, and Faneuil Hall, which is where the Sons of Liberty met before the Boston Tea Party. What you're driving around also and trying not to kill pedestrians while pointing stuff out to tourists. And it was a good lesson in the difference between academic history and the kind of history that people would actually pay, I think it was like $35 to drive around and hear about. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. After that, unsurprisingly, I moved to someplace where it doesn't snow, Austin, Texas, and got a master's degree in information studies with a concentration in digital libraries from UT Austin, and then stayed on to get a certificate of advanced study in archival science from UT as well. And now I work at the LBJ Presidential Library in Austin, Texas, which, despite its name, is actually an archives, not a library. So, yeah. Has anybody been there, incidentally, just so I have an idea? Yeah, did you like it? Yeah, okay, cool. As we go through here, I would like this to be as informal as possible, in part because I'm not real sure what you guys actually want to learn from this. So please interrupt me, raise your hand, whatever. If there's something that isn't clear or there's something that you already know and you don't want to talk about anymore, just let me know. Okay, I just lost my screen. Okay. At the LBJ Library, one summation bit, this is the most intense project that I've used Omeka for. You may have heard of this. On Valentine's Day of this year, we released the love letters between Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson. And this is Omeka, and this is one of the sites that I worked on. If you haven't seen them, take a look at it. They're really, really cute. LBJ was very passionate, and Lady Bird was very girlish, and we digitized all their stuff and put it online. So, and neither of them can be embarrassed because neither of them are here anymore. So there you go. A lot of what I do at the library now is public history stuff, although I am technically an archivist, but I do a lot of making our materials available to the broader world on the web. And this is one of them here. This is kind of my pet project. This is the LBJ Time Machine. It's on Tumblr, and it's a blog using archival materials. And it's going chronologically, much slower than real time, because there's a lot of stuff, through the life of LBJ. So Anyway, okay, enough about me. Omeka. Who's currently using Omeka here? Anybody? Yeah? What are you using it for? For a highway what? Oh, cool. Okay, is it live now?
Sort of. It is live, but it's text.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so that's cool. That's at the beginning kind of the evolution. All right. Well, Omeka, for those of you who are not using it, it's actually a Swahili word, and it means what it says here, to display or lay out goods or wares. It's all about access. This is not for presentation. It is not a digital asset management system, although it has that kind of functionality. It is all about making stuff that looks good so people will want to use it so you can put it on the web. It calls itself, this is from their really extensive website. Actually, as I'm talking, if you want to look at it, it's omeka.org. It's sort of the main hub of all of their stuff. It's serious web publishing. One of the things that's really cool about Omeka, and I'll keep coming back to this, is this idea of allowing multiple types of users to interact with Omeka in the ways that they want to, with the Omeka kind of at the center of all of this. So as you can see, we've got the cultural content creators there, which by and large are going to be the people who do, say, the digitization. Or other people, because there's this collaborative piece of Omeka as well, and we'll look at that more extensively later. But the general public can contribute to Omeka as well. So there's expertise implied, but it's really not necessary. Then you've got the librarians and archivists, the people who are experts at description, for archivists, obviously, organization for both archivists and librarians, I would say. And then museum professionals. And this is part of why Omeka is both as cool and as powerful as it is, because it's built on this model where you've got collections, which is essentially just a database of individual digital objects. But then overlaid on that is the exhibit function. So different institutions have done this in different ways. In the LBJ Love Letters collection, for example, every single one of our items was in an exhibit. For us, that was a different point of access. But the way it's designed is for you to have all your stuff in a collection and then for you to pull out particular things of interest, organize them in an interesting way, and build an exhibit. The analogy is a museum, where you've got vast holdings and then you create exhibits from that. So it's kind of a different model. For both libraries, where typically, what you got is what you got, it's on a shelf, and for archives, where, we don't have stuff that we don't let people look at unless, there's some important reason why they can't. Let me get some water. So far, does anybody have any questions about anything? Anything that doesn't make sense? Okay. Keep an eye on the time. Okay, so the most important kind of technical piece of Omeka is that it's open source. And you all know what open source means, right? It means that it's free. You can download it, you can modify it, you can see all the code. A lot of the similar pieces of software that do this stuff are not necessarily free or open source. Content DM being the big one is proprietary. Omeka, if you have the skills, you can make it do damn near anything, and that's what's so great about it. And that's where the flexible part comes in. You actually have several options with Omeka as well. This is another kind of unique thing. A lot of these kinds of platforms have a really high barrier to entry. Omeka has, and again, that's what we'll be using, a free, easy-to-use, hosted version of it, where you need an email address and then you're on your way. Or you can actually install it on a server, and that requires a completely different skill set. Something that comes, oh, sorry? I'm sorry, say it. Oh, what's the governing model? It's from the, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Roy Rosenweig school at, where is it? George Mason, yeah. Yeah, so it was developed, but they're still supporting it. I don't know if there's funding coming in from other places. There's a lot of other institutions that have been working on. The Scholars Lab is another one where they've been doing a lot of development. I have not seen a lot of developers making money off of Omeka yet, which is kind of interesting. So I think at this point, it's still being supported largely by academic institutions, namely these. One piece of software or platform that gets used a lot in comparison to Omeka is WordPress, which the first time I saw it, I was like, WordPress? Like, this is a completely different thing. But that was their conscious model for this, because they wanted it to be as easy to use as possible. The big difference being WordPress, because it's a blogging platform, gives you a lot more flexibility. Omeka, you don't want to use it if you're not dealing with digital objects, because that's the whole point. It's essentially like a digital library software. You've got individual items described at the item level, and you can kind of aggregate them into collections or even into hierarchies if you play with it a little bit. But really, it's about digital objects. It can handle any kind of media, which is also really cool. PDFs, film, audio. You can embed YouTube clips. You have to kind of mess around with it a bit to make that work. But you can use photos, all kinds of different stuff. There's actually a crowdsourcing module that's a plugin, which we'll talk about later as well. Are you guys using photos for the highway? Is there anything else or just photos?
Right now, primarily photos.
Right. Okay. And that's really where it shines. I mean, in my opinion, the photos are probably its native kind of environment. But you can use maps as well. And again, it's for web publishing. This is not an internal digital asset management system. You don't want to use it just so y'all can keep track of like versions of stuff or any of the sort of things that you can do with that kind of software. This is about pushing it out to the web in a simple and attractive way for people to use. And as I mentioned before, it includes Web 2.0 participatory stuff as well. You can comment on things. You can share it with your friends on social media. You can, I think you can create accounts. You can be a user with different kinds of access. Like you can be an administrative user, obviously, which when you guys set up your accounts, you will be. But you can also set it up so that the general public has limited privileges, but they can go in and add their own items. As I mentioned, WordPress was their model. The difference between Omeka, because it's kind of all things to all people, it's also kind of helpful to think about what it isn't. As I mentioned, Omeka is based on digital objects, and WordPress isn't. That's the big difference. Omeka is a little bit more difficult to use. Out of the box, it's really simple, but what you can do with it is pretty limited, and you will see that. Dspace is another one. Does anybody use Dspace? It's an institutional, yeah. Do you have a web portal for that, or is it just internal?
We just experimented with it years ago before we went to the system that we're now using.
Ah, so you didn't stick with Dspace. Why not?
I don't recall at the time exactly. This was several versions. I think it's like version 3 now. This was
Yeah.
version 1 that we had implemented. BYU had implemented Dspace as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason we went away from it was because it's open source.
Oh, really? Because it was open source.
Because it's free like a puppy.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. The archivists like to say that free like beer, free like kittens. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that was a problem. We played with it as well, and it took so much technical expertise, and then we still couldn't make it look good. And that's why, and we'll look at an example later of an Omeka Dspace where the idea is that Dspace does its thing, because Dspace has all kinds of functionality that Omeka doesn't have. It can handle digital preservation and version control. It runs checksums on your files, and it does a lot of things with access to these digital files, whereas Omeka doesn't do any of that, but it looks so much better. I mean, Dspace, like, it was built by nerds at MIT, and it has that feel. And you've got this weird terminology. Omeka is much, much simpler and looks really good. But Omeka is not as scalable as Dspace. Dspace can handle lots and lots of items. Omeka cannot. Omeka versus Content DM. In some ways, this is the closest sort of analog to Omeka. Like Dspace, Content DM does all sorts of stuff that Omeka doesn't do. That's a big difference. Open source, certainly different people feel different ways about it. For us at the LBJ Library and for other institutions I've worked with, open source is a good thing if you have the expertise. The fact that it's simpler than Dspace means you don't need quite as much expertise to make it do what you want to do. Who's using Omeka? It was developed in the academic environment. There's been a lot of work done on educational projects, groups of students building things, teachers sharing digital, usually objects from the archives, from what I've seen, with classes. Museums have used it, not quite as much, but you do see it as a cheap and easy way to build digital exhibits. And there's a plugin that allows you to actually, it's funny what he said about QR codes, because the plugin lets you install QR codes around your building, which then ideally museum visitors hold up a phone, snap a picture, and retrieve the object from Omeka so you can see the full metadata. And then you could even comment on it. Hopefully there'll be something more exciting than QR codes that will let you do it, but it's a neat concept to be able to go to a museum and see all of the information they didn't have room for on the descriptor on the wall, right? And certainly not, this is not the only thing that does it, but that's one of the plugins. Archives are using it. It's not really ideal for archival collections because everything has, you have items and then you have collections over the items, encompassing the items. With archives, obviously, you want a hierarchy. You want a collection description, and then you want a series description, and then you, in our case, sometimes you want a folder description, and then you want items in the folders, in the series, in the collection. You kind of do that with Omeka, but really it's better for discrete individual objects. So special collections work pretty well. And hobbyists, I think Omeka's been pushing hard to try to get hobbyists involved in this stuff, in part because of the participatory nature of it, where you could have, say in Ann Arbor, you could have people who have family photos of Ann Arbor who could theoretically add them to a digital archive run by, say, the Ann Arbor Public Library, and you could add your version to their collection, which is kind of neat. As far as the Omeka.net versus the local hosting, really this is pretty straightforward. The Omeka.net, you don't need any technical expertise whatsoever. And it's free if you're only using, say it's like 500 megabytes of storage. Once you go up from there, it costs more money, you get more plugins, you get a little bit more bang for your buck. If you want to install it locally, you need a LAMP web server. So that's Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. And really, you're going to need somebody. If you've got the technical expertise to install it, you probably have enough to at least begin playing with it. All the plugins are available, but only for your version of Omeka that you're running. Because there's some, we're in Omeka 2 right now. Not all the plugins from version 1 work in version 2. There are some for version 2 that are available through Omeka.net that are not available for either 1 or 2 if you have it locally installed. And it's free, yeah, free like puppies. You have to know what you're doing. And you have to have the web servers, obviously. You have to have the storage. You have to have the expertise. You need all that stuff. If you use their servers, you don't need any of it. Okay. Okay, so Omeka, for the most part, the terminology is pretty straightforward. You've got your site, because Omeka can be used as a standalone site. That's probably how you guys are using it, right, as its own, yeah. And that's how the love letters is set up as well. Within there, as I mentioned, you've got collections. Within the collections, you've got items, which are individual records. You've got files attached to an item. So the item contains both the description and the file. And then you've got exhibits, which are built from the collections. You can have multiple collections and multiple exhibits. So we'll see examples where you've got collections of one collection of photos, one collection of documents, one collection of maps. Then in your exhibits, you can bring all of these things together in different ways. So that's one of the things that's really neat about it. The exhibit setup is you've got sections and pages, and unless you go into the back end and start messing around with the PHP, you are kind of stuck with that formulation. And it doesn't work for everything, and again, we'll see some examples. You've got a browse functionality through tags and through the exhibit. They call it browsing in collections, but really you're just kind of scrolling through them. There's also a search, and that, and again, in my opinion, is one of the weaknesses of Omeka, and we'll look at why that is. There's themes that come with Omeka that you can modify if you have the skills and it's locally installed. To some extent, you can do it if you're using Omeka.net, but you don't have as much control. And a lot of Omeka, once you know what it looks like, you'll see it. Like, you can tell what's Omeka and what isn't, what has like slightly modified different themes. There's users with different levels of permissions. And then there's metadata. The metadata that it comes with is Dublin Core, straight up Dublin Core, basic Dublin Core. There are plugins where you can extend it out. There's also, if you use the locally installed one, you've got all kinds of different options as well. There's PB Core, there's EAD. I think they're working on TEI, although that's not been done yet, but there's a demand for it. There's item level metadata, which is kind of weird and seems to sort of be like what you want to include that doesn't fit in Dublin Core. Yeah, it's kind of weird, but that's what it comes with. And then there's plugins, which are basically just individual bits of code that you attach to Omeka that let you do different stuff. Some of them are really simple, and they range from things like a plugin that'll extract the text from your PDF to make it searchable. Some of them are much more complex. Some of them are really, really neat. One of them allows you to take your objects and plot them either on a map or on a timeline, and it all happens automatically from the metadata. And that's called Neatline, and that's one of the most exciting things I think that Omeka has to offer, and we'll look at that too. Okay, so let's actually look at Omeka. Omeka.net is where you set up your account. That's my account. I'm apparently signed in. Okay. And if you want to do this as we're talking, that's totally fine too. You log in, and then you've got your dashboard here. And you see your limit on the free account is 500 megabytes of storage. This is my really crappy Omeka that I set up. This is what it looks like from the front end on the home page. And see, here's the items, the collections, and the exhibits, as I mentioned earlier. You've got the browse items, which without the tags, which are, you can see here, each item can have a tag, and then you can browse that way, which is a more effective, I mean, that truly is a browse. Otherwise, it's just a list of your stuff. And this was neat. At least in my institution, we're accustomed to thinking of search, but we've never really had the functionality to have an easy browse kind of built in to allow people who aren't already experts to be able to go in and poke around and see what you've got. And you know, like many of these, the bigger it is, then the more items there are with that particular tag. So those are the collections. And there's really no rules as to what's a collection and what's an exhibit. You can set it up however you want. And that's one of the really neat things about Omeka, is that because all this stuff is built in and you don't have to create it, it gives librarians and archivists and professionals the chance to actually think about putting the stuff that we all learned in school on this, like, into practice, which is, okay, what should the metadata actually say? Okay, well, Dublin Core is so simple that it gives you lots of flexibility in terms of how you want to use it. And then on top of that, you've got a collection, which, you know, for archives is pretty simple, but if you've got a special collection or you have more flexibility, you can define them however you want. And then you've got the exhibit, and then that's where you actually get to be creative about it in terms of what are you going to pull, how are you going to organize it, and how are you going to describe it. The exhibits So here, in this instance, the collections, I try to do with basically provenance, because I'm an archivist. My garden, stuff I pulled off the internet from Central Texas Gardener, and photos from El Paso. And then exhibits, you can unify any of the things from the various collections. Now, I mentioned the themes earlier. The theme here is different from the exhibit theme. And that's something that's like kind of neat, but it's also kind of weird, and you have to get used to it. Going back to exhibits, you can add a logo, add a description. These are the sections, and then you've got the pages under it, which if it doesn't really fit what you're trying to do, you're still stuck with it, unless you really want to go in and modify it. You're stuck with it on the basic level. And then the exhibit functionality, you have control over this display. You can make it do different stuff. You can also add images that aren't necessarily part of your individual records. When you go through an exhibit, you're still retrieving an item that's in your collection. So you retrieve your item, and then you've got, here's your Dublin core up at the top. And then you've got your object on the bottom. And then you've got your collection here and your tags. And the tags are clickable, which takes you back to the browse items. So it's pretty simple, particularly in this instance where there's like 20 objects in their very basic description. Let me show you what the admin side looks like. The admin side is also pretty intuitive. And this is what we'll be working on later on. You've got your items, so the individual records with your file attached. Let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, so here's a list of all of them. They're just in order of whatever last one you put in. They're assigned an ID number that's unique. Here's your item types right here. Here's your public versus featured, your date added. If you don't select that things are public, you only see them. I mean, this is good for where you've got a workflow where you've got somebody entering them and then somebody proofing them or something like that. Then they don't automatically get pushed out. Causes a problem when you forget to click it and then you can't figure out why you're not seeing it. The individual item metadata looks like this. Again, pretty straightforward. You'll notice that the fields are repeatable, which is kind of neat. So you can actually have multiple subjects, say. You can also use HTML. So if you want to add a hyperlink, you can do that. And this is how you're able to add the embed code from a video so that you can actually see it within Omeka. You can just hit play and watch the video without leaving the site, which is really cool. Especially good for local institutions that really don't want to host streaming video, but who doesn't have a YouTube account? It's easy enough. Creator, source, publisher, and then your files get added. Well, here's your item type metadata. This is where you select, and you get a different set of metadata that you can change based on what your item type is. I don't know how they came up with the various item types. They're kind of random, but you can add your own, so that's fine. And you can delete them if you don't like the ones that you've got. Then you've got your collection, and you actually define your collection here under that tab. The files you upload one at a time. And this brings me to one of my favorite and least favorite things about Omeka. It was kind of designed for you to describe and add your objects one at a time. There is a CSV import, and that's what makes it work for, say, the LBJ library, where we've got hundreds of some of these objects, and we really need to be able to import them. On Omeka.net, you have that plugin as an option. That's it here. What you don't have is a way to add your files in a batch. So if you want to do that, you can create all the descriptions automatically, but you can't attach them to your files. You can do that through a different plugin if you have it installed locally. So that's one thing to know. Like if you've got a ton of files that you need to kind of FTP to the site so you can create the records automatically, I think maybe with the more expensive Omekas, you might get the Dropbox, and that's what it's called, the plugin. You might get that option. If you do it locally, you certainly will. Speaking of plugins, those are all here. And it's a pretty limited selection. I think there's 8 total for the free one. These are the general settings. And this is where you name the site and all that stuff. Here's your plugins. There's a CSV import. Exhibit builders, the thing that actually lets you build the exhibits, which makes sense. Library of Congress, subject headings. Those are cool. Authorities and vocabularies. And subject headings is a different plugin, I think. Simple Pages allows you to create other web pages within your exhibit. So if you have stuff that you just want to tell people about, you can create pages, and it's really simple to do that. And then you add it to the navigation so that you can see them as you're moving around the site. And as you go up in the pay scale on the hosted Omeka, you get like a couple of more plugins available to you. They're all available for your version if you host it locally. And that's kind of a really quick and dirty, let me just show you the users. Really, it's intuitive enough that the actual entering of the information is fairly straightforward. And again, it allows you to focus on the stuff that we all do best, which is to say, think about what the metadata should look like. Think about how people are going to want to access your items. What kind of search terms are they going to use? What are the most effective tags? How do you organize them in exhibits? Are people going to understand the difference between a collection and an exhibit? Because I don't know that that's necessarily intuitive either. So how do you make that clear to them? It allows you to think about all that stuff without having to build all of this yourself. And here is the various, so right now I'm in here as the super admin. One thing when we start using this afternoon that you absolutely need to know, if you're playing with users and permissions, don't deselect yourself as a super admin, because if you do, you can't go back in and change yourself back because you're no longer an admin. So if you want to see what a reduced user access level looks like, create another account. Just come up with a different email address, enter it in, they'll send you an email, and then you go in that way. But absolutely don't change your own account, because you're just completely out of luck at that point if you do that. You have to wipe the website and go in a different way if you want to be an admin. So you've got your super, admin, researcher, and contributor. And that's something we might want to look at later on as well. So I think I'm kind of over time, right? 11:30? We got started a little bit. Oh, 12 o'clock. Oh, right. OK, cool. Well, then we'll keep looking around here. Look at more of the plugins. Oh, good. I can slow down a little bit. OK. The exhibit builder is, and this is a plugin. This is not part of the original Omeka. Fairly straightforward. You add the exhibit. You edit the exhibit. I'm going to look at the edit. Here's your description. Here are your tags. You just enter them in. You don't need like a sort of master list of tags where you can select from them. You can, whatever tags you think belong in the collection, or for the exhibit rather, just go ahead and tag them. Featured, public. Featured just means it gets more prominence in the site. And then here's what I was talking about with the structure. So you have 3 layers. You've got your exhibit, and again, you can have multiple exhibits. But you've got your exhibit, and then you've got your section, and then you've got your pages. And these aren't defined at all. It's really up to you as to what you want to do with them. In this case, I was like, well, how about years? But as you can see, like one of them has part of a year and the other one has the whole year. It doesn't actually need multiple pages. Doesn't matter. Like you're stuck with the structure unless you go in and modify it on the back end.
Does the section itself have like an automatic home page for the section?
No.
Or do you have to create a page and call it like the main page?
The way that the sections and pages are displayed is really weird, because your page is, let's actually look at it. Your pages are actually within your section. And that's something, especially in certain of the themes, that just, it's weird and it's not clear. When we first started using it, it wasn't, I couldn't figure out how to see the other pages. So let's actually look at that. Oh, right, I keep doing that. OK, so that was all of my exhibits. Now I'm within this particular exhibit. So here's my sections, and these are my pages. No, these are my sections, and then I go into the section, and these are my pages within the section. So here you see the sections. You can actually switch sections, or you can switch pages. And again, I don't know how y'all find this, but this was weird for me, because it's not clear I mean, I could see circumstances, and we can look at some installations of Omeka where, like, oh, that makes sense. But for archives, say, where we would want the hierarchy would be at the collection level, not at the exhibit level. Like, we would want to be able to do the collection series folder item, and it doesn't give you that option there. Where you get it is here, but this is supposed to be kind of like the creative part. And this is where it also doesn't really map to a museum. I guess in terms of like a room, maybe it kind of, here's the museum, now here's your modern art, and then here's your subset of modern art. I don't know. It's a small complaint, honestly, in the scheme of things, but it's just something to know. Sorry, did you have a? No, okay. Okay. So, but it's still, and you can, let me show you the themes, actually, because that's where a lot of this, sort of where the rubber meets the road on a lot of this. And one of the complaints that you see about Omeka has to do with the themes. We could really use some better ones, but it's open source, so somebody will build them at some point. But it's also a good example of the different kinds of skill sets you need for different stuff. You've got the back-end stuff, you've got the PHP, the MySQL, the coding stuff, and then you've got the design. And those are really, you're going to have two different people in addition to your contributors, your describers. I mean, unless you happen to have all the skill sets, but there are lots of different roles. And if you're like a one-man shop, what you're going to be able to do, the configuration is going to be fairly limited. Like, you may end up just stuck with a theme unless you know how to get in there and get into the CSS without screwing everything else up. Because of course, with CSS, it's easy to do that. And if you want to do things like resize images, well, you're going to have to make sure that the image is resized properly on all of them. So anyway, but here are, so we're in settings here, and then there's the plugins, themes, and users. This is your global stuff. So there's themes at two levels. There's the site theme, and then there's the exhibit theme. So here are your various themes. I've got Berlin currently. Rhythm is kind of the most complicated. And I'll just show you what that looks like. This is really awesome, though. Like, this is all it takes to completely change the look of the site. OK, so you click Save. And now I'm in the exhibit, so it actually wouldn't change it here. But let's look at, yeah, so wow, right? That's it. Like, it completely overlays the new CSS. And once you know, this is what I mean about, like, once you know what Omeka looks like, you'll recognize it, because it's always got every of the themes, unless it's been modified. You've got your browse items, browse collections, browse exhibits, about, and there's your search box. Browse all, browse by tag, and again, this is just the list. And here you're browsing the exhibits. There's your collections. So it all looks basically the same. I think they all have the collection description. At least on my screen, that's impossible to read. It's so small. The item display is the same. There's the featured item I mentioned earlier. So you've got your list. Another one of the complaints about, oh, sorry.
This looks like version 1 you're using, is that right?
Omeka.net is version 1, I think. But it's got some plugins that work for version 2 that you can get through Omeka. I don't really know, but I think most of the functionality is version 1.
So do you have experience with version 2?
I have not used it. No, I haven't. We looked at it for the library, but felt basically like it was too untested at this point. And a lot of the things we knew we wanted to do, we were going to have to figure out how to do them within the new framework. But, and I'll talk about this later, it's got some other stuff that's really awesome and addresses some of the complaints about this version 1, which is good, because that's exactly what it should do. So here, I personally really like the way this theme, I don't love the colors, but the metadata makes a lot of sense. You can see the image is a lot bigger in this theme. And then you've got your metadata over on the right-hand side. And then, so that's some of the metadata on the right-hand side. And then the Dublin core is under it. You'll also notice that even if the fields are empty, they're still displaying. So that's annoying. And that's something that you can fix. There's a plugin that will fix. You can fix it on the back end as well. But for some of these, I mean, you have flexibility because it's Dublin core, but relation, say, in this case, is not something I'd actually want to use. And if you don't fill it in, it just shows up as no text. And this is the image type metadata. So my image type here is a still photo. This is where I have the control in this version of Omeka, at least, to add or delete individual fields. But it doesn't add them to Dublin Core, even though with extended Dublin Core, you got lots more options. Here, the way it's organized is that the only one you're really allowed to modify is the item type metadata. So if, for example, you wanted to add a field the way archives might for a series to all of your fields, you either have to use extended Dublin Core, modify the metadata that you've got, or add it to the item type metadata, even though there's nothing about a photo that makes it have a series. Like that's just like the one that it's easy to modify. So that's a limitation. OK, so let's look at what some organizations have done with this. This is a list of links, and I'm happy to share. It's just a Google Doc. If y'all want to give me your email address or whatever, I guess we can add it to the slides later on. And there's a video that I found that actually goes into everything that Omeka 2 has, all the modifications here as well. Might be worth looking at. Where are? OK, so here's the Omeka showcase, where you've got, looking at 200. There's some of the other ones here. Inventing Europe. OK, technology in the making of Europe. Let's look at what these guys have. So certainly, if you get a designer involved in this, you can make it look so much slicker than. All right. Than it does out of the box. But even here from the thumbnail, you can see that you've got different pieces added, but you've got the browse the archive. It's still the theme. It's still a recognizable version of the theme that's been modified. Let's see if I can get this one to load. OK. So yeah, you can recognize, I don't know, this might even be rhythm, just because the colors kind of look like it. And so there's your object, and there's your description. And they've modified it so that you don't see all the fields that are empty. But so you see here again, you've got your sections up at the top, and then you've got your pages under the sections. It's the same thing. And where are their exhibits? OK, let me talk about the search a little bit, because OK, let's go to search. All right, I don't know what just happened. All right, I'll try a different search. No, let's look at. All right, let's look at my search, because this is for sure unmodified. One of the weird things about the search out of the box for Omeka is it doesn't search anything that's 3 letters or shorter. So I have 2 records in here that are 3 letters, and you can't return either of them through the search. I don't know why. It's just how it is. If they're longer than 3 letters, this is what it looks like. So it has the same look as the browse items. Oh.
I just let you know that's a limitation of SQL.
Oh, it is. OK.
Yeah, you can get around it, but it's not very easy.
OK.
So
yeah.
Probably Omeka's by choice. It's more limitation.
OK. So it's not Omeka. OK, well, that's good to know. That's not their fault, because it's a very weird decision to have made. So in this case, I only have one item described as cactus. That's fine. This is another beef of mine. Maybe it's not a huge deal, but it isn't clear to me what tags are going to appear here. So I'm in the search. Am I just looking at the subset of search results, or am I looking at the tags for everything? You know, because it looks just like the browse items page. So is it the subset, or, you know, and in this case, you know, I don't actually even know the answer to that. Let's just see. Yeah, so the tags are for everything. And I think one could be forgiven for thinking that what you're looking at is a subset, but that's not true. And if you look at the URL, you see we're out of the search now entirely. We're back to the items tags page. Not a big deal, but again, maybe not intuitive for the users. The advanced search is one of the more serious limitations of Omeka. And they're working on this. It is better now in Omeka 2, from what I understand. There's also a Solar Search plugin that allows you to do a completely different set of things, but requires some pretty intensive, heavy lifting. You've got your keywords. You've got your narrow by specific fields. Out of the box, you get all of these as options, even though some of your fields may not be populated. So because it's not a faceted search, you don't know what fields aren't populated because they're going to appear here no matter what. So it's possible that you could search on something and return no results because there's nothing in the field. It doesn't give you, see, there is a date. The date appears here, but there's no, let's just see here, real clear, like if you put in the year, certainly it'll turn it up. Don't believe, actually if you do the whole field, it probably would. Actually, let's try it. So I've got a bunch of, oh no, the titles are just 1, 2. Okay, well, never mind. So the search maybe isn't everything that you want it to do. But you know, there's also the argument that the only people who ever use advanced search are librarians anyway, that actual users never use them. But as the world increasingly moves to faceted search, where you don't get the option to refine it unless there's something in the category you're looking at already, this looks kind of out of date, which is, again, why they're improving it. Public, non-public, not sure why you'd want to search that. Anyway. So going back to the other, these are the basic fields that I think you'd probably want to use for building a site. Simple pages is exactly what it says. It's really easy. You create a page, you give it a name, it builds your page. And it's that simple. And it just appears. Again, if you make things public, it appears on the public site automatically. The tags is a nice bit of control that you get. You don't have to enter the tags. You can do the tags at the items when you're creating the items. But you can also, like if I decided that I don't want to call my tag herbs and vegetables anymore, I can change it here without having to do it one at a time. So that's really cool. I could call it fruit. I could spell fruit properly and save it. And again, because it gets pushed out immediately, and this is how I would recommend playing with some of these features, because you're able to make a change and then see what it looks like immediately. So there you go. It changes it for each of the items all at once. In terms of changing multiple items at once, you can go in and select multiple items here, and then edit your selected items. But you can't, tags is one of the things that you can edit, but you're limited. You don't have the full set of metadata. So if you wanted to, you put the date in the wrong spot for everything, and you want to move all the dates from one field to another field, you can't do that. You have to go in to each one and do it individually. Or you could re-import, if you have your metadata in a CSV, then you could re-import your CSV. But that's what it is. There's no global, again, without going in on the back end and changing the field in the database, there's no global way to change that.
So you said you could re-upload your CSV, is there some type of batch delete then?
Yeah, there is actually. You know what, let me show you the, I saved a copy of one of our of the CSV, and I can show you what that looks like.
You know what the restrictions are to, like, who can batch delete? Super administrators, researchers, contributors?
Probably only super administrators. I would assume so. Maybe administrators as well. No, actually, I bet administrators can, because I think the big thing you can do as a super is all the global stuff. You can change the theme for the whole site. You can add a plugin. So administrators probably could do that as well. Beyond that, probably not. Okay. Okay, so CSV, in case anybody doesn't know, is just a fancy name for a kind of like a flat database. You can do it in Excel. You just take an Excel spreadsheet, a single worksheet, and save it as a CSV file. I really like Excel. Again, talk about nerdy. So I do a lot of manipulating the data in Excel and then saving it as a CSV from there. People who don't like Excel, you can use other stuff to do it. If you're doing lots of complicated stuff, like you've got a field where you have, you want to create an item name, say, like an individual file name from your date, right? You've got these files are named as a date, and you don't want to copy and paste and modify it all at once. If you've ever used Google Refine, that's a really good way to do stuff like that. And it's easy enough to add your Excel spreadsheet in there. You don't have to do lots of tricky mapping within your spreadsheet to the fields. When you actually import it, you'll get to say, here, I've named them just so I know. But yeah, you've got your item type, your title, all that stuff. You can have columns here that aren't actually going to show up in your record. That's OK. You just tell Omeka to ignore it. The only really, well, it doesn't matter for Omeka.net, but if you are using Dropbox and you're adding a whole bunch of images all at once, you have to have the exact pathway to the file on the server. So it's a lot of opportunities for mistakes here because you are working, or at least the way I do it, I'm working in Excel. One thing, and I don't know if this is something you guys have encountered, that we wondered about, say we've got 100 records, they're all set up, they're done from the CSV import. Now we want to add a new item to each of these 100 records because you can have multiple files in a field. So how do you do that? Well, there's nothing set up in Omeka to allow you to do that. As far as we can tell, you have to go into the back end and modify the database. So it's fine as long as you keep your CSV and you update your CSV file every time you update Omeka. But if you've got changes, then effectively you have to pull out your CSV, remove all the items, and then re-import it. And since you can only really import, say, 100, 200 max items at a time, if you're dealing with big collections, this is one of the reasons it isn't super scalable. Because if you're doing it for big collections, it's painstaking and you get errors. Anytime you're doing something like this, you could easily get errors. And if you do, or you want to pull it out though, if you've imported, if you want to just wipe out your items, you just select them and hit delete. If you want to remove your import, had I imported something in a CSV, I would see it appear here, and it would say status imported, and it would give me the option to delete it. And that's how you remove it. And it'll just pull out all of the records that we created from this file. And we can actually look at that.
It pulls out both the items and the metadata.
Yes. Well, your files stay in there. Your files stay in. If you're using Dropbox, which with the CSV you probably would, you would have a Dropbox tab, and it would have a list of files there, and you could just attach your file. If you're not using Dropbox, then you would need to upload it when you recreate the item. But yes, it'll pull out. You won't have files with no metadata. When it removes the metadata, it removes the files too. But, and this is worth mentioning, you don't actually need to have, and this is again why YouTube video embedding works, you don't need to have an item to have the metadata. Your item could be a hyperlink. It could be embed code. That's all fine. Some of the other, I'm trying to think of which other ones. I know with digital asset management systems, because that's what they are, you have to have a digital asset. And here, you can do more, you're more flexible because it doesn't have to necessarily be a file. Okay, well, I think I'm going to stop there. There's lots more to go into, but really, you kind of have to use it in order to be able to see how it works, and then we can do questions or whatever later on. Does anybody have anything else for right now that they want to know? Yeah?
So, I was curious about audiovisual
Mm-hmm.
projects, and with the Omeka.net, it seems
Right. No, it isn't. I mean, one way to get around that, again, would be using something like YouTube and hosting your video there, and then linking to it. So you could always do that. You could do it with Flickr too, for that matter, or SoundCloud. There's actually a SoundCloud plugin as well. But you probably need to configure it, and configuring with Omeka.net, you may or may not be able to get it to do what you want. Yeah, you probably need to buy more storage if you've got clouds, you know, of significant size, items of significant size.
So how's the user community on this? Do they encourage a lot of input from the users?
Yes, yes. If you just Google it even, there's lots and lots and lots of discussion going around. There's very little, I actually only found one that was like, here are my complaints about Omeka. For the most part, what you have are people proselytizing. In part because of the appeal of it being so democratic. You know, it's a lot of people who are professionals, who are librarians, archivists, talking about how great it is because it allows input from the public. One of the things that might be interesting to look at this afternoon would be, so how does that actually work? Like, we all think it's a great idea, but what's it actually like if you're a user? Is it as transparent as we like to think it is for people, or are we just kind of telling each other how great it is that the public can use it? So.
And then one last thing to keep in mind, and I think everybody knew this via email from me, is that the State Library has purchased up to 10 sites on Omeka.net, and so that gives those sites that want to do this, it would be hosted through Omeka.net, and then there's considerably more storage on the purchase version. There are considerably more plugins and other assets available to you, and some of the groups that are here today, I've already set you up a site, and you've already received a username and password, and if you have that, we can also change the password so that it can be set up to your email account, and we can get you all set up on that today. And if there are other people that want to use the site that the State Library has purchased, if you'll contact me during lunch, then I'll set you up on that. Okay? So with that, we're going to have lunch that starts at 12 o'clock, which is right away.
There
And
you
I
go.
just want to thank you,
Okay, yeah,
Lizette,
no problem.
for coming, and come back again right after lunch. Okay?